Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me today as we are going to be diving into the case against Shanna Gardner. She has been arrested and charged with the conspiracy to murder her ex-husband, Jared Bridegan. Jared and Shanna were married for a few years before they welcomed a set of twins, a boy and a girl named Abby and Liam. They were married for a few years when things began to fall apart after some accusations that Shanna was having an affair came out. Reportedly, Jared wanted to still make their marriage work, but another contentious point in their marriage was that when they met, they were both a part of the LDS church, but Shanna was kind of drifting away from the church, whereas until his very last day, Jared remained a devoted member to the church. So, with all of these things, they were divorced in 2015. And although they had a very, very contentious divorce, the two of them moved on to their separate ways. They both were remarried. Jared remarried to a woman named Kirsten, and the two of them welcomed two additional children to their family. And Shanna remarried to a man named Mario Fernandez Saldana. And if you have been following this case at all, you will know that Mario has also been arrested and charged for his role in the murder plot. So Jared and Shanna had split custody of the children. On Jared's week, Shanna would go to Jared's home, pick up the twins on that Wednesday, and vice versa. So this particular Wednesday, it was Jared's day to pick up the twins, where he would take them out for what they would call date night. Now, this Wednesday seemed to be like any other, but when Jared dropped the twins off at Shanna's home, on his route that he would normally take, he came across an obstacle in the middle of the street. A damaged tire was found kind of placed right in the middle of the road, where some people might call this a choke point, particularly if you're in the military. And this essentially means that this road is narrow, it's a one-way street, and Jared didn't have the opportunity to drive around the tire, nor could he turn around because it's one way. So the only option he really had was to get out of the vehicle and move the tire, which is exactly what he did. And just about the second that he opened his car door, a man jumped out from the forest nearby and began shooting at Jared, hitting him twice in the left shoulder area. And what made this ambush particularly atrocious was that Jared's 2-year-old daughter, Bexley, was strapped in her car seat in the back seat as this attack took place. Now, thankfully, Bexley left the scene unharmed, at least physically, but I don't think it's a stretch to believe that this event, she will carry it for the rest of her life, even though she was only 2 years old at the time. It was such a traumatic event, and it's something that she's going to hear about for the rest of her life, and that's in itself is very tragic. Now, at the time of the incident, some passerbys saw Jared on the ground. At first, they thought that he was changing his tire until they approached further and they saw what happened. They heard Bexley crying in the back seat, where they took her out of the vehicle. And I assume that's when she saw her father laying on the ground, where she reportedly told police that her father was sick as he was dying on the ground. Now, the timing and the placement of this tire made investigators believe that this was a planned and targeted attack, and Jared Bridegan was the intended target. Now, since his murder, 3 people have been arrested. That would include the shooter, who has admitted his guilt in the crime, and that was Henry Tenon. Now, when Henry Tenon was arrested, we're going to dive into the details a little bit more later on. But when he was arrested, police knew that he didn't really have any connection to Jared. They knew that he didn't act alone. This wasn't necessarily something that he would have done without instruction or payment. And they offered Henry Tenon a plea deal, which he accepted. And the plea deal, essentially, he was going to plead guilty to a lesser charge of second-degree murder, which still carries a sentence of at least 15 years in prison. And in return, he had to testify truthfully against any co-conspirators. And that is when Mario Fernandez Saldana was arrested and charged with the murder. And a few short months later, Shanna Gardner would be arrested as well, facing the same charges. And now Mario Fernandez Saldana and Shanna Gardner are both facing the death penalty. Now, the case against Mario Fernandez Saldana seems to be very strong, as he was the one to actually write the checks to Henry Tenon. According to Henry Tenon's testimony, he was the one that provided the firearm, the ammunition, and he says that Mario was the one that actually drove the vehicle that night. Additional digital evidence shows that Mario Fernandez was at Henry Tenon's home the night prior and the morning of the shooting. And it just so happens that both Mario Fernandez's cell phone and Henry Tenon's cell phone were turned off at the time of the shooting. With all of these pieces and Henry Tenon's testimony against Mario, I think the case against Mario Fernandez is very strong, but the case against Shanna Gardner is not as strong. However, as things continue to come out in these pretrial hearings, I do think that the evidence is beginning to stack against Shanna Gardner, and we are going to go over some reasons that I believe point to her guilt. Now, let me preface this by saying that all individuals I speak about on this channel are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Everything I'm going to speak about in this video is alleged based on the very public information that is already out there, including everything that has surfaced in the pre-trial hearings. So make sure you do your own research and form your own opinions. With that being said, let's go ahead and dive right in. Now, the state does not need to prove a motive in order to convict for murder. However, I think that is going to be a crucial part in the state's theory, as there was no reason to have Jared Bridegan killed unless it were for Shanna Gardner's authorization and incitement. It was no secret that the divorce between Shanna and Jared was very, very contentious, as the two of them would go to court. They said at least annually. There were hundreds of divorce filings and custody hearings. And according to Jared's widow, Kirsten, she was often saying that Shanna would lie in court attempting to paint Jared as a bad father. Now, as Jared was a very devoted member of the LDS church and wanted to raise his children as such, Shanna did not see things that way, and she did not want to raise her children that way. There are a number of text messages showing that Shanna hated Jared and everything that he was doing, where he would not speak to Shanna in any type of verbal manner. He would not be in the same room as Shanna. All of their communications were over text messages and emails. Now, in my personal opinion, I think that this is quite indicative of how Shanna would twist Jared's words. And that is why he didn't want to communicate with her unless it were in print. Now, a lot of this aspect is going to be hearsay. We don't really know the full truth of what was going on. I have heard some conflicting statements that the children really prefer to be with Jared. And perhaps if that is true, then that would cause a lot of jealousy on Shanna's part. However, I've also heard the opposite, that the children didn't like to be with Jared. But some of the statements that she even made herself would conflict with the idea the children didn't want to be with Jared. For example, in one of her statements that she made to police, she said that it was Jared that didn't want the children on Wednesdays. However, the children did. So saying those types of things, it doesn't really line up. And again, on the night that Jared died, she said that she spoke with the twins and they had a wonderful night that night. So there are quite a few conflicting statements on whether or not the children preferred to be with Shanna or if they preferred to be with Jared. But there is an Instagram page, Justice for Jared B., which this page is ran by Kirsten Bridegan, Jared's widow. And on that channel, you see quite a few different videos of the children having a great time with Jared. It seems as if he was a very, very active father. And on this page, I did read that one of the children wanted to be baptized in the LDS church, and Shanna was quite upset with that. So obviously, if Jared was not in the picture, Shanna would have full control of the children. And I think that's a huge part of the motive in this case. Additionally, there is a monetary gain. I heard a lot of people talking about this case and how there wasn't any financial motive, and they couldn't be more wrong. During a pretrial hearing, the trust for Shanna Gardner was brought into question, as Her parents are very, very wealthy. They have deep pockets, and they created a trust for Shanna Gardner. However, Mario Fernandez, her husband, was the trustee. So the way that this trust was set up, it was an irrevocable trust with Mario Fernandez as the trustee. So essentially, this trust is directly benefiting Shanna Gardner. She's able to get money from it through a third party, but it's also safeguarded from any litigation. And all of the money that she receives from it is not considered income. And as Jared Bridegan and Shanna were often battling in court over custody and over child support, that money is not technically considered income. Now, I know if I were Jared, I would certainly be upset at that aspect of it. And Shanna seemed to have been playing the victim as if she wasn't benefiting from this trust and that she was struggling financially, which is absolute bullshit. Now, in this trust, I haven't seen this for myself, but according to the documents, this trust had a clause in it that until she had no entanglements with Jared Bridegan, she could not be the trustee. However, if something were to happen to Jared, if he were to die, then she can take full control over the trust. Now, shortly after Jared Bridegan was murdered, Mario Fernandez and Shanna Gardner seemingly split up. Shanna moved all the way across the country to Washington State, where she took full control over the trust. It was also said that there was discussion about them splitting up months before Jared Bridegan's death, meaning that there was certainly some pressure on Shanna to figure something out so she can take full control over the trust when she and Mario were no longer married. So if that's not a financial gain, I don't know what is. The behavior of Shanna Gardner within the weeks of Jared's murder speaks volumes. Now, I don't know how much of this is going to be allowed in as evidence during her trial, but for us as outsiders, it paints a very damning picture. Let's start off with the fact that Shanna Gardner did not allow her twins to go to Jared's funeral. Now, she says that this is because she wasn't wanted, but here's the thing, Shanna, when it's for the twins, when it's for them saying goodbye to their father, it's not about you. And that really is indicative of how selfish and how self-centered she was, to think that she shouldn't let her kids go to her father's funeral because she wasn't allowed. When it's clear that she hated Jared, why would she even want to be there? But for her not to allow her twins to go to their father's memorial service really speaks volumes about the character that is Shanna Gardner. Now, weeks after Jared's murder, she reaches out to Kirsten via email asking for Jared's death certificate. Now, this was before Kirsten even had a copy of the death certificate herself. She reaches out to Kirsten via email, so cold and heartless, asking for a death certificate, not sending any condolences or well wishes, or asking if her daughter's okay after she had just witnessed her father being murdered in front of her eyes. And shortly after that, she asks for books that her twins need to return to the library. Now, from my perspective, looking in, it really just seems as if Shanna wanted to twist the knife into Kirsten, as she had her entire world crumble at her feet as her husband, her beloved husband, was murdered weeks prior. To make matters worse, Shanna cut off all communication from the twins, from Jared's family. The twins were no longer able to see their half-siblings or Kirsten, who knew the twins since they were 4 years old. She has not had any contact with the twins ever since then, and she was really like a second mother to them. Now, throughout a lot of these text messages, Shanna goes on and on about how Jared is such an evil person because she wants to do what's right for the twins. And her actions after his murder really proved that she did not care about the well-being of the twins. She cared about her own selfish needs. The day after Jared's murder, she had a yes day, which essentially means that anything the twins can ask for, she will say yes to. So she took them out, bought them drum sets, and did basically whatever they wanted. And shortly after that, she took the twins out on a vacation while Kirsten and her family were mourning the death of Jared Bridegan. Now, of course, people grieve differently, And I understand that. But as Kirsten and her family and her children are grieving such a tragic event, she takes these kids out on a vacation where they're smiling and happy. And again, people grieve differently. But in this circumstance, with everything else that we know, it just seems so cold and heartless and pretty insensitive. Now, this is where we get into some actual evidence against Shanna Gardner. There were text messages between herself and her best friend, Kim Jensen. Now, a lot of these text messages happened when Jared and Shanna were first getting divorced back in 2015, 2016, 2017. And the defense is arguing that these took place so far back that they shouldn't be admitted into evidence. Now, these text messages talk about hiring a hitman. They talk about dancing in the street when Jared is killed. There's even some talk about Shanna being happy, thinking about Jared's throat being slit. Very gruesome things. And the defense again suggests that all of these text messages were made in jest during the trenches of their divorce and that she wasn't serious about them. But here's the problem with that. There are further text messages where Shanna is saying that she's not even kidding. She wants him gone. There are text messages between Shanna and Kim saying, is it too late to hire a hitman? And Kim responds with saying, Susan's husband may know a guy. And then that same exact day, Kim reaches out to Susan saying, hey, Shanna needs a guy. When Susan asks what kind of guy, Kim says, the kind that do permanent disappearing acts.
So here we are at State's Exhibit now 18. These are text messages between Ms. Jensen and SL. And in these messages, Ms. Jensen is asking her if she knows someone, and she says, Shanna needs a guy. And what direction does this conversation take?
Basically, Ms. Jensen's reaching out to Ms. Lee and stating, hey, Shanna needs a guy who does permanent disappearing acts. And she says that she needs a magician for stupid, referring to Mr. Bridegan, and asks if she knows anyone who can basically accomplish this.
Now again, both Susan Lee and Kim Jensen suggest that these were all just inside jokes. It was never meant to be serious, but it's still very odd that they are speaking kind of in code, saying disappearing acts, using terms like Chris Angel, and they're saying that they're going to be dancing in the streets when Jared is dead. Could some of these be jokes? Sure. But the fact that Kim Jensen went so far as to reach out to another individual saying that Shanna needs a guy just seems a little bit too cryptic for it to be a joke, at least in my personal opinion. Additionally, during Kim Jensen's testimony, she mentions a trip that Shanna Gardner and Mario took just a week before Jared Bridegan's murder, where Shanna and Mario were discussing their marriage and where they were going. And this is when her story begins to become contradictory. At first, she suggests that Shanna told Kim that the two of them were talking about getting divorced. And this aligns with Shanna and Mario when they admittedly said months before they even told the school that they were talking about getting separated, but they were going to wait until the end of the school year. So during this trip, just a week prior, they were talking about getting divorced. And again, this goes back to the whole trust thing, the whole irrevocable trust, where I think that Shanna was looking for a way to take control over her trust, knowing that herself and Mario were going to be separated. So during this trip to Hawaii, according to Kim's testimony, Shanna and Mario are discussing their relationship and they're talking about getting divorced. Now, sometime on this trip, Mario also allegedly tells Shanna, if you want me to take care of Jared, now's the time to tell me. And it just so happens a week later, Jared is taken care of.
Shanna had called me and told me that they had decided to get divorced. And Mario said, do you want me to take care of him? Or do you want me to take care of him? You know, I don't know him, I'm not really sure. And she said, Jared, and he said yes, and she said absolutely not. She said, I choose you. And that was the whole conversation.
Now, later in her testimony, Kim Jensen suggests that Shanna said, "No, I don't want you to do that. I choose you," meaning she chooses Mario instead of Jared. But again, that doesn't make sense because they were just talking about getting divorced. So why would she say, "I choose you" over Jared when she ends up splitting up with Mario and Jared ends up dead? Now, just another point to throw in there. Shanna admittedly told police in her interview that she married Mario not because of her love for him, but for optics, because it looked better to the court system. There's also some speculation that Shanna married Mario because of his willingness to harm or kill Jared Bridegan. Now, I don't know how much evidence there is to show that. However, I do wonder if perhaps the state is going to play into that theory and try to get Mario to roll over on Shanna. This is where the case is going to get very interesting because Mario and Shanna have completely different defense teams. There is a possibility they can work together, but I don't really see that happening. I think that Jose Baez will do whatever it takes and will throw anybody under the bus if it means getting an acquittal for his client. When investigators began looking into Shanna Gardner, they filed a warrant through Ring, the Ring footage company, for the footage from Shanna Gardner's home. Now, it is said that Shanna had a home-based business and she would have the Ring footage recording at all times to ensure that when she put the product on her porch for her client to pick up, and it was picked up, it was really there to make sure that nobody stole packages. There was no claims that the package was never there. To the surprise of the investigators, the Ring footage from the day that Jared died was not there. Whether it was set up not to record that day or whether that Ring footage was deleted, I'm not sure. Hopefully we'll have some more answers for that in the future. But either way, that certainly looks suspicious. Investigators were looking for the footage showing the time that the twins were dropped off, when Jared would have pulled up to the house and when he left the house. Additionally, it could have showed things like when Mario Fernandez was at the house or when he might have left. Because according to Henry Tennant's testimony, Mario was driving the truck to the crime scene where Jared was ambushed on that night. So without that Ring footage, investigators cannot verify where Mario was the night that Jared died. According to Shanna and Mario's statements, they said Mario was sleeping on the couch with a headache, suggesting that he had taken some medication that made him go to sleep. But according to the twins, when they talked to police, they said they never saw Mario. Initially, they said they heard Mario playing video games in the other room. However, they never actually saw him. So it is possible that they set up the video game system in the other room to make it seem as if Mario was home when he wasn't. But again, this goes back to Shanna Gardner. Why would she lie to police saying that Mario was sleeping on the couch if she had nothing to do with the murder of Jared Bridegan? Other missing evidence is when investigators got search warrants for Shanna Gardner's property. A lot of the evidence that investigators gathered were from Kim Jensen's phone, but the correspondence that they should have found from Shanna Gardner's phone was missing. Now, could it be that she deleted all of those text messages? She even spoke about syncing information to her other phone, but she was worried that it would sync all of the information from her iCloud. Again, this isn't necessarily proof that she was involved in the murder, but all of these pieces together certainly paint a very damning picture. When investigators began looking at the crime scene of where this tire was placed, there was no footage directly showing the location. However, when they were speaking to people who drove down Sanctuary Boulevard that night, and as they gathered surveillance from nearby areas, such as nearby neighbors or local businesses, the people who drove down Sanctuary Boulevard just prior to Jared Bridegan went through with no issues, meaning that this tire was specifically placed in such a small period of time to ensure that Jared would be the one to move it. Now, with this information, and according to Henry Tenon's testimony that Mario Fernandez was with him that night, it makes me wonder, how would they know when to place the tire if it weren't for Shanna letting Mario know when Jared dropped the twins off? The timing of when this tire was placed would have to be so precise down to the very minute to ensure that Jared would be their intended target. Now, this next point is perhaps the greatest evidence against Shanna Gardner. Shortly after Jared Bridegan's murder, Shanna retained a lawyer, which she says was to protect herself and her children. And she also obtained a PR team that previously worked with her mother's Stampin' Up! Company. And that's really beside the point. The point of this matter is that when Henry Tenon was arrested in August of 2022, he was charged with things that had no relation to Jared Bridegan's murder. The police never informed the public that he owned the truck that they were looking for in relation to Jared's murder. They never mentioned anything about any connection to Jared's murder. Henry Tenon had a rap sheet of charges dating back to '93 of traffic violations, driving without a license, domestic violence, leaving the scene of an accident, things of that nature. Now, police were zoning in on Henry Tenon, but they never let the public know that he was a suspect in Jared Bridegan's murder. That was inside information, and they did this very strategically. When he was initially arrested in August of 2022, he was charged with driving on a revoked license and a felon having a firearm, as a shotgun was located in his trunk. Nothing was released to the public that Henry Tenon was even a suspect in the murder of Jared Bridegan. However, shortly after Henry Tenon was arrested in August, text messages between Shanna and her PR team were discussing the arrest, talking about they weren't sure what the charges were. Now, according to the defense, Shanna never met Henry Tenon, so how would she know, or why would she care if he was arrested? Yet she is going on and on about needing to talk to these individuals who work with her PR team about his arrest, also discussing if she should warn Mario Fernandez about it, because at this point, Mario and Shanna are no longer together. They're still technically married, but they're no longer together. So why would Shanna need to warn Mario about the arrest of Henry Tenon if she didn't know he was involved in the murder of Jared Bridegan? Additionally, they also speak about the truck. So Shanna admittedly knows that Henry Tenon owned a truck matching the description that the police were looking for in Jared Bridegan's murder, yet she never thought to mention it to police. This not only shows of her knowledge that Henry Tenon had a truck, but it shows that she is concerned when he is arrested, that she actually flies back to Florida and stays in Tallahassee shortly after Henry Tenon's arrest. And it wasn't until January of 2023 that the charges for Jared Bridegan's murder were brought against Henry Tenon. I will reiterate that all suspects are innocent until proven guilty, but I think that this piece of evidence shows, at the very least, that Shanna Gardner knew about the conspiracy to have Jared Bridegan murdered. Now, of course, much of the information that we have so far is from the state's perspective. There are still many things to come out in this case, but that is a huge obstacle for the defense to overcome, and I'm not quite sure they're going to be able to do it. So from everything that I've seen so far, I think the case against Shanna is strong, but time will tell what else will come out. Shanna is innocent until proven guilty, and the burden relies on the state. Who knows what evidence the defense will have to combat all of this information, all of this evidence against Shanna. But circumstantial or not, this doesn't look good for Shanna. Excuse the interruption. My camera decided to die at the very end of this video, just as I was about to wrap up. We went over all of the circumstantial evidence against Shanna Gardner, included the text messages. where she is joking about hiring a hitman. And the defense can say they're joking all day long, but if all of the evidence kind of comes together to put this puzzle together, they can say they're joking, but if all of the evidence says otherwise, that can be a conviction. We saw the same thing happen with Charlie Adelson when he was on trial for hiring a hitman to kill his ex-brother-in-law, Dan Markel. He suggested that all of these comments about hiring a hitman were jokes, but all of the other evidence came together to show that he was guilty of hiring a hitman. Again, the defense suggests that Shanna Gardner was making these jokes and that they were so long ago they shouldn't be taken seriously. However, other evidence even points to the fact that they were trying to take out Jared long before they actually did. And part of the holdup was the fact that it was during COVID when a lot of people were staying in their homes, where Jared would essentially be untouchable. Additionally, in her text messages, she also said that they would have to wait until things were cordial between herself and Jared, which would show that she wouldn't have the motive. But I don't think she anticipated that things would continue to be hostile between the two of them for so long. And text messages again showed that she did not want to parent with Jared Bridegan. And she certainly showed a resentment towards Jared, that she had to parent in ways that she didn't want to for optics in the court. She didn't want to do that. So the motive was there. We went over the fact that the financial motive was there. As soon as Jared died, she was looking for the death certificate, which I believe was to show that she had no more legal entanglements with Jared Bridegan, therefore she could control the trust. And she obviously would want to take over control, knowing that her and Mario were discussing getting separated. To their own account, their own story, they said they already notified the schools that they were going to get separated. Therefore, Shanna would need to come up with a way she could take over control over the trust. One thing I did forget to mention after I mentioned the motives, I think there was also a deep sense of jealousy. In some of the text messages, when she was talking to Kim, they were talking about other ways that they could take out Jared, such as raising his blood pressure. They mentioned that Jared was a lot more overweight when he was with Shanna. He was overweight. He didn't really seem to have been as involved with the children. This part of their story, I do believe, at least at some level. And I think that when Jared met Kirsten, he really fell in love with her. He lost weight. He was getting very physically fit. He was doing great in his career as he was an executive for Microsoft. And he was a very involved father. And perhaps that was not the version that he was when he was with Shanna. And so now Shanna's looking back like, this is who I wanted to be with. And now he's with Kirsten. And throughout the relationship on Facebook, everyone's praising Kirsten as she's this wonderful person and Jared's soulmate. And I imagine that Shanna felt a deep sense of resentment and jealousy, and that would also play into the motive behind killing Jared. And then we get into the missing evidence. The fact that the ring footage was either set up to not record on the day that Jared died, or it was deleted. Either way looks very suspicious that it just so happens on that day there was no ring footage to show when Jared dropped the twins off, when they arrived, when Mario was either there or not. That certainly looks suspicious, as well as all of the text messages investigators were expecting to see that would correspond with what they found on Kim Jensen's phone. That wasn't there. And I imagine there's going to be a lot more evidence because they seized all of her technology, and I'm sure we're just getting a glimpse of the evidence against her. And then lastly, we get into the text messages with her PR team. They were corresponding and discussing Henry Tenen when he was arrested in August of 2022 before charges were brought against him for the murder of Jared Bridegan. Why would Shanna Gardner be so concerned when Henry Tenen was arrested and she didn't even know what the charges were for at that time? Again, he was not charged with Jared Bridegan's murder until January, and she was talking about this months prior. So there's clearly some knowledge at some level, at least in my perspective. That's what the evidence is showing so far. Again, everyone is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. But I do think that that is quite a hurdle for the defense to overcome. But at the end of the day, I'm just hoping that justice will prevail for Jared Bridegan and for his family, because what happened to him is such a senseless tragedy, and he certainly did not deserve that. And for his daughter to be in the backseat really just adds a level of depravity to this case. So I hope that we will see justice prevail in this case. Other than that, that's all I have for you as of today. Again, this trial is not going to take place until October of 2025, and that's if it doesn't get delayed any further. So I imagine we will be seeing additional evidence come out in these pretrial hearings and everything that's going to come out in trial. So we will be following this case closely. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think about this case in the comment section down below. Make sure you like this video before you go, and I'll see you guys in the next one.